Okay, moving right along. The next talk is security operations, moving to a narrative-driven model with Josh Goldfarb.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for sticking around to the bitter end. I think I have about 3 things working against me here. The first one being that it's a bit late in the day. I know everybody's had a long week and maybe a few beers here and there, and so people are probably a little bit tired. Also, the last talk was really cool, and a lot of cool, fun stuff, demos and stuff in the last talk. This is going to be about security operations, which is a little bit less cool than hacking, but it's actually still pretty necessary. So looking forward to having a little talk about that. And the third thing is it actually sounds like there's a wild party going on next door, which I think sounds a bit more fun than this, but that's all right. Thank you for sticking around. A little bit about myself. I haven't presented at DeepSec before. But I've been on the vendor side about a year. I was with a startup called NPulse, which was a network forensics technology. It was mentioned earlier in the OISF talk. And we were acquired by FireEye in May, so I came over to FireEye. Before that, though, what's more interesting than that, the last year, is before the last year, I spent my entire career on the operational side, so working with large Fortune 500 companies to build enhance, improve security operations centers. And I learned a few things during that time, and I think I made some observations. I do quite a bit of writing for publications like Security Week, SC Magazine, UK, things like that, and try to help and share bits of information that I find helpful for security operations. And I'll share one such thought that I wrote a column on in May called the narrative-driven model. Before we get going, how many people here, show of hands, are working in kind of a security operations or an incident response type setting? Yeah, so quite a few. Great. So that's good. So I actually presented this yesterday at IrisCon as well in Dublin, about 24 hours ago exactly. So this is the first time I've ever presented back-to-back, two days in a row in 2 different cities at 2 different conferences. So I'm not quite sure what day it is, but it's okay. All right, so I think we all are pretty much pretty well aware of the different statistics that are out there. Just to recap briefly, so enterprises spend somewhere on upwards of $30 billion a year on security. So I think that's something like 24 billion euro, if I did the math correctly. But as we all know, despite spending $30 billion, organizations still get compromised. And not only do they get compromised, those compromises stick around for a long time, right? Long enough that hackers and attackers can take millions of payment cards, can steal plans for fighter jets and helicopters and all kinds of things, right? Long enough to actually poke around, figure out what you want, and take it out before being detected. And of course, once there is a detection, whether it's done internally by the organization or it's done externally by a law enforcement agency or a group like Shadow Server or something like that, once the organization is aware, it actually takes quite a bit of time to respond, right? So it would seem like we're not really doing a great job because we spend a lot of money and we still have problems. So I actually think that the community as a whole is making progress, and I'm very positive on the community, and I have had some very good dialogues with some people who are also doing some pretty cool things and making progress. But to the outward observer, someone who, say, is a business executive or somebody who lives in a kind of an accounting world, the numbers don't look particularly good, right? So just to give you an idea of the time scale here, so does anybody know approximately how many months 229 days is? It's approximately 8 or 9 months. So to give you an idea, 229 days ago was approximately March 1st. Okay, it's a long time, right? Does anybody have any thoughts in their mind, since we're dealing with kind of people like to hack? What would you take between March 1st and now if you were able to get access to a bank network or a government network? Or, I mean, could you imagine, right? That's a lot of time. You can do whatever you want, pretty much. And it goes undetected. 2/3 of the time, it's detected by an external organization, something like a credit processing company that detects fraud. We have a big problem with this in North America. Here, I think the chip and pin is a bit more secure, so you have maybe less, although I'm not really familiar. But I would actually be interested to talk about that later if people have experienced fraud with a chip and pin as well. And of course, about 97% of organizations are breached or have intrusions, according to our sort of lab numbers. And then further, beyond the 229 days, there's 32 days, typically, a little over a month, it takes to respond, right? So a lot of people talk about these numbers, right? I'm sure I'm not the first person you've heard stand up here and put these numbers up on the screen. But the difference is that because I was operational, I asked the question, why, right? I always ask questions. Sometimes people say to me, why do you ask so many questions? And I say, why not, right? So, well, that was supposed to be a joke, but anyway, so point is that I like to ask questions, and why seems to be a good one here. In other words, given the amount of money we spend, the amount of time we spend, right? If I look around the room, I see people who have been doing this a while. You guys didn't come out of university 3 weeks ago and begin doing your jobs, right? You've been at it a little while, so you have a high level of skill. The question is, why does this keep happening? And the answer is that I'm going to tell you in the end, but I'll give you a little sneak preview. Is it's not entirely our fault. But I will make recommendations of how we can get better. All right, so is anybody familiar with that attack chain, kill chain paper from Lockheed Martin from a few years ago? Yeah, a lot of people are familiar with that. It's kind of overquoted. I won't bore you to death by going through all the different stages. You're bloody aware of them already. But essentially, just at a high level, one of the best ways to get into an organization is to exploit the human. And maybe an Android blackjack game too, I don't know. But one of the best ways into an organization is to exploit the human, right? To take advantage of the weakest link, which is the human. And that can be done through social engineering, things like phishing emails, maybe USB key sticks in the parking lot. We've seen a lot of case studies on things like that, really interesting things that people come up with to fool people into getting malware onto a network. Because if you can get a user to willingly execute something, you don't have to exploit anything, which is fantastic for the attacker, not for the defender, right? So that stage is called kind of reconnaissance, right? Reconnaissance, we typically think about black helicopters in the CIA kind of flying around, but really reconnaissance in the security sense is anything I can learn from maybe a LinkedIn profile, Facebook, Twitter, a couple of phone calls into an organization. People generally try to be helpful, so if you feed somebody a story that's somewhat realistic, they'll actually give you a lot of information. I'm sure we've all done this at some time or another for either a good purpose or for some other purpose. But it's actually fairly easy to get information out of people, and they don't do a lot of checking. And that is great for an attacker because it helps to make things like spear phishing emails much more realistic. Of course, you either have to then exploit something to gain access to the system, or if you can get somebody to run the code willingly through social engineering, that'll work too. And of course, you need to call back. Why? Because you need to obtain instruction as to what you do next, right? Malware that is just sort of running in la-la land with no communication back to the hub is not going to be particularly useful to anybody. Of course, you have to maintain persistence, because if you can't survive a reboot, for example, then you're not going to be able to do much damage. And of course, you need to exfiltrate data, which is, again, hand in hand with the command and control, because in order to exfiltrate data, you need to understand, say, what the attacker's after. So you need to get some type of instruction, right? Now, that's all, pretty common knowledge, nothing really interesting there. But why am I going through it? Does anybody know what these are to a defender? Forget the attacker for a second. What are these to a defender? They're clues, right? They're footprints in the sand. They're evidence that attackers are leaving that we can latch onto, and we can use them to help us better understand what's going on, right? So let's hold that thought for later. All right, so we all know that the industry is going through this transition from a focus solely on prevention, right? For many, many years, we put a lot of money into blocking things and stopping things and protecting things, and that's good. We need to continue doing that. However, we also need to understand, and I think that this is becoming more accepted beyond the, say, core security community into, say, executives and other type of business people, that there's a balance between prevention and then, of course, detection, analysis or forensics, and response, right? Incident response. And that balance is important because if we focus only on prevention and not on detection and response, then when we have an issue, which we will have an issue, it's almost guaranteed that no matter how good we are at defending, we will still get compromised through some means or another. If we focus only on prevention and we have no means for detection and response, then of course we're not going to be too successful in identifying that, and of course we'll have no way to respond to that and remediate it when the time comes. So we need to make sure that we cover the entire incident response lifecycle. So if you think about kind of a crime scene, right? Let's say you were walking down the street and you see that there's a body laying in the street, right? It's kind of hard to know what happened from just the body in the street, right? You need to have a little bit more evidence. So maybe, if you think police would look for something like maybe some bullet shell casings, or maybe some blood, or witnesses they would talk to, strands of hair, footprints, all these types of things. These are essentially those clues, like we were talking about before when we had the attack chain or the kill chain. And so those clues are important because what they allow us to do is they allow us to answer questions that are important. Anytime there's an incident, the first thing we need to do is respond to that incident, but respond using data and support our investigation with data, not sort of make stuff up, right? I've seen cases in the past where if an organization didn't have the right type of data, they hadn't collected it ahead of time, or their logging infrastructure was not really reliable, so it wasn't there when it came time to do incident response. If we don't have the data, then there's really no way to put it back after the fact. Once it's left, once that time has passed, that we have that window that we have to record the event has passed, then we have no way to record it. So assuming the data is there, which I think many organizations are becoming a bit more aware of, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered, right, after you have an incident. How did they get in? How long have they been here? When did the activity begin? What systems are infected? Is it malware? Is it something else, like, say, for example, SQL injection or brute force? What data have they taken? That's huge for legal and privacy disclosure and all those types of things. All these questions need to be answered, right? And the answers need to come from the data. So essentially what we do is when we have a detection event, be it external or internal, say from an alert that we pursued and vetted and qualified, we then proceed to gather a lot of information, right? And we do it all manually right now. It's not uncommon to have somebody spend an hour, a day, a week, a month gathering this type of information, depending on the severity of the incident and the type of incident, right? All right. Well, I would say that the reason that this is so hard, first of all, detection, but also response, is because we live in an alert-driven model. How many people here have some type of a unified alert queue that they work out of for their security operations setting, right? Okay, good. Now, how many people can manage the volume of alerts that they get and look at every one each day? Oh, good, 2 people, excellent. But not as many hands went up as the first question, right? So I love it when if I talk to people who maybe are in an executive position, they don't have a lot of operational experience, and they say, our security operations center handles 50,000 alerts in a given day, right? And I say, there's no way, right? You can't handle 50,000 alerts in a given day unless you have 3,000 analysts. It's just not going to happen. So the question is, what's wrong with alerts, right? So maybe, like the 2 gentlemen in the back, you live in a situation where you're able to get your alerts under control. But even so, right, they lack a lot of context. You probably don't take an IDS alert, not to pick on IDS, but probably you don't take one IDS alert from one packet and contact the CISO and reboot and reformat the machine, correct? You're going to do a little vetting and qualification, right? So that's adding the context like we talked about in the other steps. Further, when you do need to add that context, typically, and this is getting a little bit better, but typically or historically, forensics technologies have made it a little bit difficult to get that information in a timely manner. So, for example, it may be better now, but recently as a couple of years ago, and again, depending on the organization and what their implementation is, it would not be uncommon if you needed to run a query over a week, which is not that long in a detection sense when you're talking 229 days or about 9 months that these activities go undetected. If you need to run a query over a week, it would not be uncommon for it to take 8 hours or 10 hours or something like that to come back, right? If you're talking a large amount of data. Now, if you want to go back 6 months or 9 months or 12 months to really understand when the first indicator of infection, all this stuff happened, you're talking a lot of time, right? These are queries that take a very long time to run. And so what we're trying to do is enrich an alert with additional context to allow us to make a decision that's a more educated decision based on fact and based on the real data, and in fact that this process is painful. And anybody who's been operational knows how painful this process can be, particularly for things that have been around for a long, long time. All right, so I would say that the alert-driven model is not working for us as a community. That's what I would say. For example, Target was in the news recently, right? As are many companies, not to pick on Target. But they, what was interesting was that they did have alerts for the POS malware, for the point-of-sale malware, that ended up compromising the point-of-sale machines on their retail network. They had alerts for them, but they didn't respond to them fully. They maybe, I think somebody took 1 or 2 quick looks at them, but they didn't continue down the line. They kind of let it slip and fall through the cracks. And the question is why? They had a security operations center. They had shifts covering, say, I think something like 24/7, thereabouts, or maybe a little bit less, but still, you know, they were not a green organization. So why did it happen? Well, I think the answer is there's too little signal and too much noise, right? If you have 100,000 alerts a day, and almost all of them are false positives, how do you know if the one alert that you're looking at right now in front of you is the one that's going to land you in the press in 3 months, or if it's a false positive, right? Are you comfortable making that decision? Now, you people being here at the conference are probably a little bit more experienced. Now imagine you're a new analyst that's a year out of school or something like that, or even new to the job and you're being trained, and you get one alert, which is one packet, or maybe a few packets if you're lucky, and the alert says something that you've never seen before, and you Google it and there's not really a lot of helpful information, and then you have to make a decision. Do I close it as a false positive? Do I re-image the machine? Do I light my hair on fire and tell the CISO? Like, you have to make a decision as to what your level of escalation, what your level of response is. Are you comfortable making that decision? I don't think any of us are ever comfortable. We always feel a little bit of doubt, and the less experienced somebody is, the more doubt, right? And of course, because it's so hard to find talent, we end up with a lot of junior people, and those are the people watching the networks. And because of that, this is a huge problem. Alerts lacking context is I think, a huge challenge for the community. All right, so what can I suggest? Right? Well, I would suggest we think about moving to a narrative-driven model. So what that means is all the stuff that we all do manually, or that we know we need to do to enrich an alert. Say, take the alert. Let's use a specific concrete example. Let's say we see point-of-sale malware coming into the network, right? Well, first thing we want to do, let's say we get an alert on that, first thing we want to do is identify where that's destined to. So in other words, where is it going on the network? Where is it headed? Okay, then we want to find out how many systems it went to, and then of course, if those systems executed it, and if it's successfully installed, and if it's persisting or it's doing some type of post-infection activity such as calling out, right? Maybe we want to bring in a little bit of intelligence, either from some peer organizations that we have, or from some vendors or open source intelligence that we have. And we want to try and understand, is this a sample that's known, that's been seen before? Can we get more information about what its plans are for the long term, et cetera? And et cetera. And you can see that we quickly begin to build a much more complete picture. In fact, this is something that conceptually you're probably doing manually at least, but it takes a lot of time. And what I would say is, instead of doing all that work at the end, so you have, let's say, 10,000 alerts on a daily basis, you try and prioritize them, and you tell your junior staff to go through, look at the alerts, and handle the most important ones, and then enrich them until they can make a decision, or escalate, right? Now, it seems to make more sense to do it in the other order, right? Build the narrative first, through whatever means, whether you like custom scripting, whether you want to have some vendor technology, whatever. build the narrative first, and instead of presenting your analysts with 10,000 or 100,000 alerts, present them with 100 narratives, right? Because don't forget, we can have multiple alerts that could be part of a narrative. We could have one narrative cover a wide variety of activity over a longer period of time. Present them with 100 narratives or 500 narratives in a given day. Well, what's interesting, there are two things that happen then. First of all, they're able to review all of the activity of interest in a given day, let's say, or on a given shift, which enables them to have a higher level of confidence that they're not going to miss something, right? And it also avoids us from having something get swept up in the noise, meaning, say, 10 alerts that we really should have looked at, but we just ran out of time, or they were hidden because we had all these false positives from something else, maybe a new IDS signature or some other type of signature that we weren't ready for or wasn't ready for production. That's the first benefit. It guarantees that we get visibility into everything that we need to be looking at on the network, or that at least we can, our best estimate for what we can be looking at. Well, obviously, we're always going to have the possibility that we should have detected something or built a narrative for something that we didn't. The second thing is that it really reduces the volume of noise, and it reduces the total volume of work, and it takes the analyst from sort of spending most of their time concocting data to get it massaging the data into the way that they want to use it, and instead they get to spend their time doing analysis. For example, looking at a narrative and saying, is this something that I would expect to see? Is this something that looks like an intrusion geared at one machine? Is this something that looks like maybe it could be infecting 5,000 point of sale machines, et cetera, or any type of machine? I use point of sale as an example because there's been a lot of press about it lately, but it's really a broadly applicable concept. And so that's the basic idea, is that as a community, we need to move to a narrative because the alerts are just not getting it done. We see almost daily, if not weekly, reports in various media that some organization has a breach. It's been there for 6 months, 3 months, whatever amount of time. Yes, they fired alerts. No, they didn't see them. They were buried in the noise. Not enough signal, too much noise. We see the same theme over and over again. So that's why I got to thinking about what could we do about it. And so I think the narrative, and this is what I've been speaking about lately, and I've gotten some good feedback on it, and I'm hoping that people will start to work around with it and that we can make some progress as a community, because I think that it's really a direction we need to head in. All right, so how do you build the narrative? I've got some specific examples of data sources and whatnot later, but essentially, just ignore all the corporate crap. But essentially the point here is, see, what happens is, I'm a techie at heart, but the marketing department gets a hold of the slides and they go nuts. But just ignore all that. The important point here is that there's 3 components. The first one is you have to have knowledge, right? We all have knowledge. Collective knowledge is better than individual knowledge. We can all learn from each other. In fact, that's what we do on a regular basis through email lists or through even Google searches, right? That's another example of collective knowledge. Because technology or product is not a solution in and of itself. It's a tool, right? If you want to build a house, you don't put a hammer on the sidewalk, stare at it, and expect it to build the house. But yet, that's what people do with security technologies. Not everybody, but a lot. They put some system in the rack, they turn it on, and they say, great, we're done. You can go home. But that's illogical. It's a tool, right? It's not a solution. So you have to know how to use the tool. For example, there was a good talk on Suricata earlier. You can do some great stuff, really, really targeted and incisive queries you can write using Suricata, using SourceFire, using whatever your tool of choice is. But if you don't know what you want to look for, right, it's not going to be particularly useful. You have to know what you want to look for. You have to think about what are the risks to the enterprise or the organization. What are the goals and priorities I want to address when I mitigate these risks, and how can I write content to reliably produce events or detection notification when I encounter that type of activity? And then, of course, intelligence is also helpful because no matter how good we are, we still don't see everything, and we don't think of every possible situation. So if we can network ourselves with groups of people who think like we do, and maybe some that don't, that's actually good too, but essentially, we want to understand, okay, maybe I run a European corporation, security for a European corporation, but in Brazil, they see different types of malware, but I might see it 6 months from now, or I might have seen it 6 months earlier, and I definitely want to know what that looks like so I can look for it later or earlier. Similarly, for other regions or other verticals, for example, pharmaceuticals will see different threats than oil and gas. That's just the way different targets, different attackers, different malware. So it's good to have a wider net to get all the information you can in whatever means you can. Okay, so roughly, how does this look, right? So anybody who's spent any time with a pile of unreliable and noisy, false positive, low fidelity alerts knows the most important thing, first of all, is to throw out the default rule set. I wrote a column on this in Security Week a while ago. It sounds crazy, right? Throw it out. You know, your vendor gives you a profile, not to pick on vendors, I work for one, but they give you a profile of signatures, right? I mean, were they written specifically for your organization and the risks that you're trying to mitigate? Of course not. They were written to try and be as broad as possible to say that we have signatures for this and that and compliance and GRC and da, da, da. But it's not written for your organization, and it certainly wasn't written to help you do your job. So throw it out. But that doesn't mean throw the technology out and the tool and the capability. It means throw the default rule set out. So what do you do then? What do you do when you throw out the default rule set? Well, you need some rule set for all of your alerting technologies because you have to feed your workflow and you have to trigger the narrative building off something. So the first thing to do is to identify the risks to the enterprise that you want to mitigate and minimize. And most of us have, I'm sure, a long list in a corporate environment of different risks that we want to mitigate and minimize. And it's an iterative process. It's not something that you can finish. You can spend 3 days on it and say, good, I'm done. I've enumerated all of the risks for, XYZ corporation, and I'll never have to deal with another risk. Of course not. Every day we may encounter a new situation. We may acquire a company and have all these new risks. We may, of course, attackers evolve, the threat landscape evolves, et cetera. So it's an iterative process. You have to identify the risks that you want to mitigate and minimize. And from there, break them down into goals and priorities. One time I was at a roundtable discussion, and somebody said to me, security is an unsolvable problem. And I said, well, I don't know what that means. And he said, what do you mean? What do you mean you don't know what that means? And I said, security doesn't mean anything to me. That's just this void, vacuous word. Huge word, very vague, not void. Vague, vacuous word, security. So that actually gave me some inspiration to write one of my columns called Is Security an Unsolvable Problem? And the answer I said is that security as a problem is not a problem. It's a broad range of topics that refers to a lot of things. So while that makes for good press and a good buzzword, what I would argue is that instead of worrying about solving the security problem, break it down into goals and priorities, right? Like anything in life. I don't know. Like me, put on a few pounds lately. So there's a couple ways I could solve that problem, right? First of all, I could drink less beer. I don't see that happening, but it's a possibility, right? So anyway, but the point is that there's a solution, there's an approach I can take that's logical that will get me be able to progress. So you have to break down. You have to identify the risks, enumerate them again continually, right? Then break it down into smaller problems. Assign goals and priorities, right? Then what? Then identify gaps in telemetry. For example, I don't have monitoring or logging on this part of the network, or I don't have monitoring on or logging on this set of endpoints or this set of servers, or mobile. There was a great presentation on how many people here have no visibility into mobile, right, in a mixed environment, right? It's a huge problem. So that's another good example of gaps in telemetry. Identify the gaps, because again, like we talked about at the beginning, if the data doesn't exist, you can't magically make it appear. You have to record it during the time window you have to record the data, which is not a lot of time. So you have to have that telemetry in place ahead of time. All right? Then use the telemetry. It produces wonderful data. Have you ever looked at, say, proxy logs or DNS logs or IDS logs or, say, layer 7 metadata from, say, like an nPulse type thing? That's keeping the product off the side, but just the concept of the layer 7 enriched NetFlow data, so to speak. These are all incredibly rich data sources that can tell you incredible things about what's going on in your network. And that's just network. Then there's endpoint, right? If you think about, if you have some type of endpoint logging, the amount of detail and insight into what's going on, then we bring in Active Directory and other types of LDAP or different types of logging along those lines. The amount of insight and detail you can get into what's going on from that telemetry is amazing, but you have to use it. But the best way to use it is not just to write a bunch of rules or take a rule set from somebody who said it's a good rule set. The best way is to think about what you want to do, right? What problem are you trying to solve? What risks, goals, and priorities are you addressing? And write your content, develop your content to look for those events, look for events and occurrences on the network that pose risks, that would create the risks, 10, okay. That would create the types of risks that you're trying to mitigate, all right? And from there, that will improve the signal-to-noise ratio. You're not looking, for example, if you have, let's say, an HR system, and you're running a bunch of IDS signatures designed to look for payment card theft, I don't think you're going to find something very valuable there. That's going to produce a lot of noise because not the right environment. It's just not looking for the right thing. So that's what I mean. It's going to improve the signal-to-noise ratio because you're looking for things that you want to look for, that you need to mitigate, but you're looking for them in the right places in a very sort of targeted, sort of like a spear. So people talk about spear phishing. Well, this is kind of like spear alerting. I don't know. But the idea is this, you get the concept, which is that it needs to be appropriately targeted, right? And then, of course, this part's fairly common anyway. Nowadays, all of the alerts, good or bad, high fidelity, low fidelity, a lot of alerts, small amount of alerts, they all get concentrated. Now I think we're mostly at the point where most people concentrate them into a unified work queue. That's key. I once was consulting at a place during my consulting days, and I walked in, and it said, show me the work queue. And they had 4 screens full of windows. I said, you can't work like this. It's just nobody can concentrate on like 12 different windows at the same time. Just not possible. I can't do it. If you can, that's fantastic. And then, of course, this is where the narrative comes in, right? You need to enrich with that supporting evidence. All that stuff we talked about. Follow the attack through the network. Build all that in. Don't just fire the alert to the work queue. Add all that context that your analyst needs to make that decision, right? Automate common analysis steps. For example, if you get an alert that malware is coming into the network, you know that you're going to look for the endpoints it's going to. You know that you might want to do some dynamic malware analysis. You know that you might want to look for its execution and persistence on the endpoint. Then you might want to look for callbacks. Then you might want to look for lateral movement. So you can build these queries into your story. Build that narrative, right? Bring in intelligence if you have access, whatever you have access to. For example, if your MD5 hash matches something that's known, that's great. It saves you a lot of time. Now, that may not happen. A lot of times it doesn't. However, if it does, it saves you a lot of time. And that allows you to build the narrative, which you can then present to the analyst. During my analyst days, which was a long time, very, very frustrating time, banging my head against forensics technologies that didn't answer queries in enough time, looking at alerts that were just garbage, right, that some vendor had shoved on me. And again, I work for a vendor, nothing against vendors. But again, they produce tools that you need to know how to use. Could you imagine how happy I would have been if instead of getting a queue of sort of contextually unaware alerts, I got this queue of a much smaller queue of contextually aware narratives? That would have made me much, much happier. And I feel like it would have been a much better use of my time to spend my time doing analysis and making decisions based on my experience, rather than trying to go find the data I need and spending 80% of my time finding the data I need to get to that point. Okay, so that's more or less all I have. That's my idea. I've been taking it on the road, trying to keep organizations out of the press and writing about it a lot. And there's my Twitter handle if you want to reach out and continue the dialogue. But otherwise, thank you for your attention and questions.
Any questions? We've got enough time.
I've bored them all to death. Cool. Oh, thank you for making me not feel so bad.
for the analytical work in this whole concept, do you have any tips on good tools to assist in that? Well, there's obviously things like Analyst's Notebook, but that isn't really very helpful in a network context.
Well, it really depends. There's a lot of tools. If you're looking at the detection piece, if you want open source, there's a few really good open source tools. Vendor tools won't probably talk about. For the analytical piece, visualization's tough because this is something I also wrote about. Visualization in and of itself does not necessarily help. It can help, but you have to do a data reduction first, in my experience. In other words, it sounds like you have experience with this. You have to visualize something that's meaningful, right? So you have to. The problem with most visualization tools is you have to already do some work on the data and then put it in a format that it's meaningful. So for example, what's a good example? So if you just take all of the proxy logs and you say, I want to visualize it, it's not particularly helpful. However, if you reduce it to only the outbound proxy 407 authentication denied requests, and then you visualize like sizes of the, I guess like more requests 407 proxy auth denied would be like a big circle and less requests would be a small circle, for example, just an example, or maybe even in a graph. Then it becomes more meaningful because you're sort of slicing the data already. So you're looking at, say, outbound failed requests, and sometimes malware, as you know, won't pick up the credentials, the proxy credentials, and that's why you'll get that error. And in that case, it can be useful. I know a lot of people, of course now it escapes me, the tool that's online, I'm sure somebody knows, the visualization tool that's online. There's one that's online. That's one. There's another one. Figures I'm blanking on it. But
I was thinking one step further.
Yeah.
When it's time to build a narrative.
Yep.
What I'm finding is that there are tools like, for example, Analyst's Notebook, if you're aware of that helps you sort of build a timeline of connections between events. But there's not really that much automation in there to get all the network events together. Hosts talking to each other and do things. And I'm currently finding there's a bit of lacking in especially these tools departments.
Yeah, so that's a good point. I mean, so currently places that have undertaken efforts or started efforts to build the narrative, it's done very manually. However, I think a number of vendors are now currently looking at that space, including FireEye, in the sense that it shouldn't be so complicated, right? Incident response security operations should be about doing analysis, responding to incidents, and not, like you said, all that sort of manual work to get the data in there and connect it. So I think we're not there yet. I think you're correct that at the current time it's very immature, and it still needs to be done with a lot of, say, Python scripts or Perl scripts. If anybody's a Perl person, I don't want to offend them. But you're correct.
MATLAB, for example.
MATLAB?
MATLAB, actually. Oh. It's if you have a bunch of network connectivity data, it's handy to draw the errors, who's talking to whom and such things. But it's clunky.
I was a MATLAB flunky in grad school, so so that's a good point. It's currently immature, but my hope is that there will be better options in the near future, because I think people are really understanding the pain and the need. So.
Okay, we have one more question.
So I guess I'm an open source hippie, but at the same time, I'm more on the vendor side as an IDS creator. I liked your term spear alerts, or which would be, I guess, context-aware alerts, or you would tell, in my case, the IDS what the environment is in much more detail. So I was wondering, in a large environment, this is very hard to configure, to tell your tools what the environment is exactly like. So you could automate this by auto-detecting things, but then the detection things can be fooled, and then you can be blinded, which is maybe a worse problem in some cases. So do you have any thoughts on that, on how you could do that?
Yeah, so you're right, it's difficult. So in my experience, organizations don't do it particularly well because it's hard. But I did see one organization that had a separate, just using IDS as an example, they had a separate IDS for every /24 on the entire corporate network, which is huge. I mean, if you think about a big company, that's a lot of IDSs. I don't know how they manage that, and they had sort of these specific signature sets for each, but I think it was 5 people's job just to do that all year long, right? So I think the answer is to, at least sort of the 80% good enough answer, is to be as granular as budgetarily, realistically possible with your detection technologies, and then write signatures that are targeted at specific systems that live behind those, where there's visibility. So for example, if I cover my entire, let's say if I cover my entire DMZ, and I know that I want to look for brute force SSH attacks, but I know that only 10 of my servers listen on brute force SSH, limit the signature to that, because there's no point in looking for it. If every other server is just going to drop the connection, or the firewall drops the connection, then there's no point in, because you'll just have a lot of false positives. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for that one. It's a tough question. Yeah, it's a good question though.
We have one last question.
Yeah, so this is very important for the business that I work in, actually having narrative, especially when you need to speak to C-level. Mm-hmm. And we do it manually now, because we haven't been able to find a way to automate at scale. So, I work with the largest content delivery network out there. And so not only is it an issue of scale, but an issue of an ever-shifting labyrinth. And so we haven't found any tooling that that they're censoring, or that meaningful, timely responses to requests actually works on our network. Do you have any suggestions for places to look?
No, unfortunately, the amount of people that are doing this is relatively small. I suspect that there'll be more and more as time goes on, and I suspect that there will be some tooling. But as of now, unfortunately, there's not a lot. Like you said, you have to do it either manually, or you have to write a bunch of custom scripts. And unfortunately, that's the state of the art at this point. But
yeah, we had to write our own querying language to do it.
Yeah,
it's a lot of time that we waste tooling instead of actually doing.
Yeah, and that's another issue, right? What's the balance? Where obviously, if you have a huge workflow payoff, it's worth it. But of course, your job is really to monitor your organization's network, and not to spend your time writing tools to do that. And I think that's I think that's a vendor fail. And I say that as a vendor. I mean, I think we need to do better. But I think the message has been received, at least where I've experienced. And hopefully we can do better. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. That's it. Thank you, Josh Goldthorpe.
Thanks.